You're watching Shalom TV, celebrating Jewish culture. Funding for Shalom TV has been provided by the following. And by viewers like you.
I'm Mark Golub, and once again, it's a pleasure to be sitting with the Executive Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, Malcolm Hoenlein. Welcome again, and this is the first time we're meeting after the new year. Shana Tova, and I hope it's a wonderful year for you and that you had a wonderful holidays with your family.
We did, but I want to wish everybody a good year. It's going to be a challenging year, that's for sure. You won't be bored. You'll have plenty of news to cover. So I guess that's the good side of it. But I hope that by the end of the year we can look back and say, Vayar Ki Tov, that we did well.
That would be wonderful. So let's hit some of the highlights and then anything else that's on your mind. You were very close in observing how the UN dealt with the move to make the Palestinian community into a recognized entity. They want to be called a recognized state. And the president spoke at the United Nations. I want to know in general, how do you feel about what happened there? And what do you feel, if at all, threatens the Jewish future as a result of it?
Those are very important questions, but there are many of them, and it involves issues of significance far beyond what would appear on the surface. That this is not simply a question of recognition of a Palestinian non-state, because it doesn't meet the definitions under international law of a state. There's no defined borders, economic infrastructure, all the other questions and issues that the Montevideo Agreement require for a state to be declared. But we have to see in the context of what the real intent here is. It's not to benefit the Palestinian people. They will not have a better life the day after a recognition, even if the UN were to vote them a state. And the Security Council will not. They, A, do not have the 9 affirmative votes as yet, and B, even if they get the 9 affirmative votes, the United States will veto it. So they will go to the General Assembly, they will get a declaration as a non-voting member, as some elevation. But what will that have changed the Palestinian people's conditions? Will their economy be better? Will there be more jobs? The opposite will be true, because the United States aid under congressional mandate and under U.S. law will be cut, just as UNESCO lost the funding from the United States, at least for now. So what is the goal in doing this? One, Abbas is looking for his legacy. This is personal. This is for him to be able to say, I got recognition of a state and I made no concessions. I didn't negotiate. I didn't give up on the right of return. I didn't give up on anything. That I did better than Arafat did. That's one. Two, it enables him, he believes, to go to the International Criminal Court. And Ocampo of the court said that if they in fact get recognition by these bodies as a state, even a non-voting state, that would enable them to have standing to come before the International Criminal Court and bring war crimes charges against Israelis. From the very beginning, Abbas has asserted that that was a goal that he sought. Three, I think it has to do with internal politics. He is not an elected president. His term ran out years ago. The Palestinian National Council hasn't met in years, and their mandate expired. But he doesn't want to have elections, and he doesn't want to face his people. He doesn't want to face them because of Hamas. He doesn't want to face them because the widespread corruption is known, and people want to get rid of him and his kids, who have benefited to the tune of many, many millions of dollars in contracts and in being the conduit for the Palestinian Investment Fund, where a lot of the aid and projects go through. So he wants to avoid having to be held to account. And if you've seen his prime minister, who is the favorite of the West, and has fought some of the corruption. He has opposed these moves. Others within the Palestinian Authority have opposed these moves because they understand the ramifications, even some that harm their ability to represent, because once the PA is recognized, let's say, as a quote, Palestinian state or entity, they no longer can say they represent the Palestinian refugees outside of that state. They can only represent the people who are within that state. The PLO, which is today the representative body in the UN and has that seat, the non-voting member seat, represents allegedly all of the Palestinians in diaspora, and the numbers go up to 11 million, 10 million. I mean, just ludicrous and ridiculous figures. So there are a lot of ramifications. But one more point that I think is really fundamental amongst many that are important in this, and that is that this is part of the campaign to delegitimize Israel. In every other conflict situation, you demand that the parties sit down and work it out. This is the only place where they can say, and what he has sought is to have Israel delivered, to have the concessions delivered without him having to negotiate, without him having to make any concessions whatsoever. That's why the United States is so frustrated. Europeans are frustrated. Here the quartet comes up with a proposal. Again, as so often in the past, Israel accepts, the Palestinians reject, because they don't want negotiations. That's the bottom line. But he also plays on the theme of delegitimizing Israel, of saying Israel doesn't have the status that we have to sit down and talk to them. You see it reflected in many things. One is the denial of the legitimacy of Jewish claims to the holiest places in Jewish history, whether it's the Kotel, the Western Wall, which they say is Al Barak's wall, or Rachel's tomb, or the Cave of Machpelah, where they denigrate and deny, by the way, not just Judaism, but also Christianity, because it's fundamental to the Christian belief in the Bible. Why would he do these things? Because he's trying to cut off any claim that Jews have to the Holy Land. So when he gets up before the United Nations and gives a speech and says that I came from the Holy Land, the land of Muhammad and of Jesus. Hello? There was a third party there? There's somebody else? We do not denigrate the Muslims' claims or saying that they have a right, even though certainly we're never cherished Rachel's tomb, never held it as a mosque till the year 2000. All the documents of the Arab League and of the League of Nations, the UN, everybody calls it Kutab Rachel, Rachel's tomb. The same with the other sites. So he says also in his speech, 63 years of occupation. So what is he talking about? He's not talking about 67. That's right. He's not talking about the West Bank. He's not talking about settlements. He's talking about Israel's right to exist. So this is part of the delegitimization campaign. And when he recently said that it was a mistake to reject the 47 agreement.
For the Arabs to have rejected the partition plan.
What does he mean by it? People say to me, oh, look, he's acknowledging a mistake. I said, exactly right, because that's where he wants to go back to and say, let's rectify the mistake. Let's accept the partition plan. Let's go back to 47. Look at all his statements, everything that he says. He comes before the United Nations with a unique opportunity to reach out to Israel. Netanyahu says, I'll stay here, I'll negotiate with you right now, here, let's get it going. And he comes up with the most rejectionist speech. And yet the world keeps saying, you know, he's better than the alternative. At some point, he's not better than the alternative. And I think people have to understand the fundamental significance. This is not part of the Arab Spring, quote, spring, or Arab winter, which I think is more likely. This is not movement towards democratization for the Palestinian people. This is far more fundamental, and the stakes are much greater, I think, than people tend to appreciate.
How did you feel about the president's speech, which someone pointed out it's the first time there did not seem to be an attempt by President Obama to go out of his way to placate Palestinians?
I think it was a very significant speech and a very positive one. I think it helped rectify some of the past speech that he gave there, where
in
he
Cairo.
raised some, and also at the United Nations, where he said in a year from now we want to declare a Palestinian state and all that. Because once you create deadlines, as well intentioned or whatever as you may be, it already creates a pressure point and said, you promised, this is a deadline. These are not deadlines, this was a goal and an aspiration. Israel said, look, we're prepared to negotiate and we're ready to do it. 15 months, we'll come to a conclusion. But you have to have a partner. There is no partner. And I think the president laid out some very fundamental truths in his remarks to the United Nations. So and you contrast that with Abbas's speech or Netanyahu's speech, which was very positive, reaching out, reasserted the truths of history. And we all know the United Nations is always going to be a hostile place, that you have the automatic majorities. We saw it at UNESCO. But what people didn't note at UNESCO is that 107 countries voted for it. 14 countries voted against it, but 52 countries abstained. That means 66 countries did not vote for it.
Being?
The voting for the recognition of
Exactly.
The PA as a member of UNESCO. And that is very important, because the vote was expected to be much higher. And I can tell you that there isn't a country we meet, not an Arab country nor others, who aren't sick and tired of this, who vote automatically, because you have the non-aligned movement votes as a bloc. You already have 107, 10, 15 countries. But all of them hold that this is a bad move. They're afraid not to do it. And the lobbying that's going on, and the Russians pushing for the recognition of this unilateral declaration, the Arab states pushing for it, others. But I can tell you what they say behind closed doors is not positive, and they recognize the dangerous precedent that's being set. This can come back to haunt a lot of other members of the UN. In a discussion with a Russian official, I used the term UDI, and he said to me, well, what is UDI? So I said, it's Unilateral Declaration of Independence. When he said, when you use UDI, I think of Kosovo. I said, exactly right. And you should think of Chechnya. And you should think of Catalonia, and you think of every other place. What about the Kurds? Are we going to do the same thing? Are you going to give them unilateral recognition? Are you going to start voting on each of these instances? Are you not setting a dangerous precedent? Aside from the fact that this is an illegitimate move that violates all the previous agreements that were signed by the Palestinians with Israel and with the international community.
Why? Because people assume, since it's going to the United Nations, it must have a certain kind of international legality. Explain why this, in fact, abrogates things that have been done in a legal setting up till now.
Well, there are many reasons, actually, but if you look at the Oslo Accords and all the subsequent accords, they all say that you cannot have a unilateral change in the status of the region, of the areas under dispute. So anything that's why if Israel would annex, or if the Palestinians declare their independence without it being coming through a process of negotiation, it is a clear and blatant violation of the agreements.
Incidentally, UNESCO.
By the way, building in the areas that are remaining is not a violation. When Israel
settlement
construction
is not a violation.
Yeah, and we should be clear: these are not new settlements. This is only construction within the existing footprints of the settlement. Settlements construction today, the whole areas that have been built for settlements, is 1.7% of the land. All the territory behind the security fences, about 7% of the land. 60% of the West Bank is not constructed at all. It's empty land. 40% is land probably occupied by the Palestinians. So the distortions and misunderstandings about all this, and how we equate, even just today, rockets coming from Gaza targeting civilian populations and are condemned, and we condemn the plan to build additional housing within existing settlements in areas that are, by consensus, going to remain with Israel. Something wrong in this equation.
And then I want you to clarify also, the State of Israel has now said it will be building more apartments in East Jerusalem.
Right.
Do you consider that to be within an existing community already?
Ma'ale Adumim, it's a city. It's not a settlement.
It's really adding to.
It's only adding to within the existing footprint. It's not taking any additional land. It's building within it. Most of this is building up, not building out. And Har Homa is a recognized city. It has, 10, 20,000 residents already. So they're adding a couple thousand apartments, but nobody talks about the thousands and thousands of units that Arabs are building in this area, not legal construction, not approved. When the statements that came out, sometimes the timing was unfortunate. It's about a stage in the zoning process. It goes through 7 stages. So each time they make an announcement that something passed the stage, so you're talking about it over and over and over again. When they talk about Gilo being a settlement, when it's an integral part of Jerusalem today, it's 100 meters from the armistice lines of 1949. So people have to go and look at a map and see what they're really talking about. and the readiness and the quickness with which so many run to condemn without looking at the fact. And it doesn't mean you could support it. You can be opposed to it. It's your, it's your view. It's your opportunity to express yourself if you want in responsible ways. But first, learn the facts. Find out what you're talking about.
Come back to UNESCO for a moment. UNESCO is the economic, scientific, and cultural organization of the United Nations. And at the moment, the United States has withdrawn from UNESCO because of the entire Palestinian flap. J Street just came out with a document pleading for America to go back into UNESCO, saying that is attempting to dissuade the Palestinians from pursuing UN membership really worth hobbling our economy, making it less safe for Americans to fly, and leaving it entirely to other countries to monitor Iran's nuclear program? And so J Street is arguing that it was a mistake for the United States to withdraw from UNESCO. What do you say?
J Street has been wrong in virtually every position they've taken, and they're wrong again. America is holding up a payment of $60 million due in November. America pays 22% of the budget of UNESCO. America has opposed this and said that this is a distortion, it's a violation, it's inappropriate. They gave warning after warning about what this means. So let all of those, France and others who have advocated for it, let them make up the difference. So we're not putting anything in jeopardy. That's number one. Number two, it's the Palestinians who did this. It's not Israel. It's not the United States. So hold them to account. There's got to be some price. You can't just say that everybody can do whatever they want. Third, the history here is very different. You know that the Palestinians were admitted when Israel wasn't, and Golda Meir was once asked about it, and she turned to the person and said, so this is a place that deals with education, culture, scientific development, research. So I guess, yes, you're right. The Palestinians have contributed so much in these areas, and as compared to Israel, so that explains it. It is the system allows itself to be manipulated. Mm-hmm. There has to be a consequence. I don't want to see interests jeopardized. I don't want to see anybody suffer for it, but it's not necessary that that be the outcome. There has to be a consequence for actions that are taken. And this is one which is mandated by American law. It's not a voluntary move on the part of the administration. It's mandated. There's no escape clause here. We will see yet whether they will cut all of the expenditures. Will they cut it back to a minimum? Israel's also withdrawn its contribution, but they have not withdrawn from UNESCO. America did withdraw under Ronald Reagan, stayed out of it for many years, forced reforms within UNESCO, some of which have taken hold, most of which, unfortunately, we see still can be subject to manipulation.
But you are advocating that the United States withhold funds from UNESCO.
100%. Why should we pay after they take the kind of actions they took, which really undermines the veracity and the credibility of the agency, and the United States is picking up a quarter, more than 20% of the budget of this agency. So let others, step in there. The Arabs, others who are pushing this agenda, let them foot the bill. America could stay in there as a member if they decide to, or pull out. Israel could stay in or pull out. It doesn't mean that we have to foot the bill.
Malcolm, speak to a historic irony. It was the United Nations as a body which legitimized the establishment of the State of Israel, the very idea that there should be a Jewish state. And now we see the Palestinians looking to the same body from their perspective for their legitimization.
First of all, not parallel. Israel came before the United Nations, went through the process of the United Nations, and adhered to the process, and was recognized as a state. This goes back to the Balfour Declaration. It goes back to the League of Nations. The mandate was clear. The amount of land that Israel got was only a fraction of what had originally been promised. The Palestinians not being denied the opportunity to have a state. 5 prime ministers have said they accept a 2-state solution. It's the Palestinians who are not willing to abide by the process. Sit down, negotiate. You have another state with whom you have to sit down. The Israelis and the Jews in 1948, when it came to the partition, accepted it. The Arabs rejected it. There was no Palestinian state. There was no Palestinian people. There was no Palestinian entity to negotiate because it didn't exist. Palestine only, has this name for 1941 years. When the Romans did it to delegitimize then the kingdom of Judea, and they didn't want to have the name Judea, so they picked up the name of the Philistines and called it Palestine. There was never a state, there was never an entity, there was nothing. Now you have a state with which you can negotiate. You have a state that is now mandated to be in charge of these areas by virtue of war launched against them. And they, in response to a defensive war, came into these territories. They're the ones reaching out and saying to the Palestinians, we're prepared to give you a state. We're prepared to help facilitate it. Sit down, negotiate, go through the legitimate process. Don't try to bypass it by going to the General Assembly, going to UNESCO, going to these other things, because you're not willing to adhere to the process that the international community has laid out and said is essential for you to get this recognition.
I also want you to comment on a flap you and I have not had the chance to talk about. In a speech, the President of the United States referred to 67 borders with land swaps as the starting point for negotiations on a new Palestinian state and where the borders would be. And there are some who've argued that what he expressed and articulated has been the de facto understanding for years and years and years. And at the same time, Prime Minister Netanyahu and others have argued that this reflects a problem going forward for the State of Israel. I want you to speak about the extent to which you're comfortable with the notion of beginning with 67 borders and land swaps, or why you find it problematic.
You can't start there, because if you start there, then you negotiate away fundamental interests. That's the ending point. And the ending point was 67 borders with adjustments,
yes,
and then land swaps. Not 67 with land swaps, but 67 border with adjustments, which every president since 67 has said is not a defensible border, whether you call them Auschwitz lines, Abu Eban, or you call them whatever, Jimmy Carter, all of them said that recognized that you need to have a defensible border for Israel based on the 67 lines, and then the land swaps were for the territories that Israel would retain from the West Bank, such as Ma'ale Adumim or Ariel or any of these other places, that you would give the Palestinians an equivalent land in another area as a, quote, swap for it, or a swap for a road that will connect Gaza and the West Bank or something else, any of the things that they negotiate. That's why you have to have negotiations, because that's how you work it out. But if you draw the conclusion of negotiations, that essentially then becomes the starting point for negotiations. And that's what's happened each time Israel sat down over the years, and we've had, some negotiations. The Palestinians say, okay, now we're going to start with the last one. What Barak offered, what Olmert offered, whatever. You walked away from it. That's over. That's no longer relevant. You start now negotiating from the same point. You start off. There are fundamental understandings about what the framework of the deal might be. But you sit down with Israel, negotiate it out, meet the security needs of Israel, meet the obligations that both states have to their peoples, work it out.
I understand the concept. I don't understand why rhetorically, in terms of the way it's expressed, there's a difference. In 1967, there was basically the 1948-49 armistice lines that were drawn to separate the State of Israel from the rest of the Arab world. In 67, there was the attempt at a defensive war by the State of Israel that brought certain territories under its control, including what's known as the West Bank. And it seems to me that the world is saying, somewhere on the West Bank, we now think there should be a Palestinian state, and all those who argue for the two-state solution have that in mind. Somewhere on the West Bank, there's going to be a Palestinian state.
But first of all, none of those armistice agreements were with a Palestinian entity.
But in essence, Malcolm, isn't it beginning with the borders that were in existence in 67, and then saying things like, some of these borders are unacceptable because they're indefensible for the State of Israel.
That's exactly
Let's
what we're saying.
Redraw the lines.
That's what's being said.
And then you said, and if the lines are drawn in a certain way, that we are taking up land from the West Bank, there will be some kind of swap for that land. So what's the difference in real substance between the way you've said it and the way people who have always said, we'll start with 67, the lines must be adjusted for Israel's security, But the adjustment is going to mean Israel will get certain pieces of land and will trade land back for it.
And they're not taking pieces of land, they're taking existing cities where the bulk of the population, primarily in the Jerusalem area. Ma'ale Adumim is an integral part of Jerusalem. The suburb of Jerusalem, it's part of Jerusalem. So we shouldn't think that they're taking distant lands and then schlepping them over to Israel.
Correct.
This is, and what you're formulating is exactly the same thing as what I said. That you start negotiating and talk about where Israel's borders will be, what the Palestinians, but there are many other issues. Will Israel be able to have troops along the Jordan Valley to enable Israel to defend itself? Because Israel's defense, you're talking about a country that will be 9 miles wide, is not going to be just along the border. We have to know, will it be demilitarized, and all the other issues that have to be worked out. It's not just territory.
But those are not the territorial issues.
Those are not. But I'm saying to you, the framework for the territorial arrangement, we understand what you want.
Speak to one other issue that relates to all this. I don't know how you felt about Israel deciding that it would trade Gilad Shalit for 1,027 terrorists. I understand how complex an issue it is. I felt that on balance Israel did the right thing. I'm less interested in your feelings about that than I am in your analysis of what has this done to the Hamas-Fatah dynamic. Did trading Shalit for 1,027 terrorists do something good for Hamas that you believe in some way now threatens the ability for the State of Israel to make peace with the Palestinians?
Well, did it gain points for the
There are
Hamas?
those who argue
The
that this
answer
was
is
very
yes.
strong for
It's clear.
Hamas.
Well, how strong it'll be, time will tell. You know, you already see how this issue has dissipated very quickly, and was Abbas angry maybe that they got these points? But he has, frankly, no claim on Israel. He has done everything in his power to obscure and obfuscate the talks, to denigrate Israel, engaging in incitement in the international community. What he says to foreign leaders in his speeches and statements are horrific. So frankly,
is this in essence a non-issue?
Well, you know, over time we'll see whether it's an issue or not. But we haven't seen, and we don't have any real polling that can tell you what change longer term this will have. I think these things tend to, in the Middle East especially, you know, it's a blip. You get some temporary credibility. Look, they delivered, these guys. The fact is, Israel got back one of their sons, and given the developments in the Middle East, you know that this was a moment that may not have come again. I, for one, would never want to be the prime minister, never have to make a decision like this, or the decisions that he has to make on an ongoing basis. I can tell you, I once spoke to Prime Minister Rabin about it. Something had just happened in Lebanon. I forgot the specific, but we were talking, and he started telling me what a prime minister goes through. And he said to me, you know, I walk out of my office, I walk out of my house, I see their families. The President of the United States doesn't see the families when he sends boys to war. He may care, he feels bad, but you live with them. He said, I know all their relatives. I grew up with them. I know their parents. He said, I see them every day. He said, you don't know what it takes. And he had tears in his eyes. And then afterwards he came to address the conference after our meeting, and he couldn't get off the tent. He started talking about it. And everybody in the room was so shaken emotionally, because you think about, at that time it involved Lebanon. So people, you know, I know that a lot of people feel that the deal was a bad deal. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. We'll see what happens when, if God forbid, you know, any of them are recidivists and come back. And the history is that most of them are. There were some who voted against it, like Ya'alon. But he said, in my heart, I vote yes. In my head, I vote no. And I think it's a dilemma. I think the prime minister had to wrestle with it. But nobody knows all the facts, and you can't second guess from a distance. What would we have gained if we hadn't made the deal and Shalit, God forbid, would have died? Would we be better off? And so it's a very complicated question, and people should be very careful in drawing conclusions and making judgments.
One other quick question having to do with here at home. And I know the President's Conference is more interested in Jews around the world than the State of Israel.
No, we care about American Jews too. Not that much.
So, Malcolm, as you watch the Occupy Wall Street movement, And suddenly we're hearing from the ADL that they're concerned that there is a degree of anti-Semitism coming out of it. How do you feel about the movement as a whole, and are you concerned now that there is bubbles of anti-Semitism erupting out of it?
Look, this didn't start as an anti-Semitic movement. I don't think the bulk of the people involved are anti-Semitic. The fact is that you've had manifestations. I have pictures of it. We've sent people down there. Sometimes they didn't see anything. Occasionally they did. People have reported these things. It's imperative for those who have organized this and who lead this to repudiate it, any manifestation of bigotry or anti-Semitism, because if they don't, then they're associated with it. You know, I think it sort of begs the bigger question about the legitimacy of what they're doing or not doing and the need for it. I think that the danger always in movements like this is that extremist elements can exploit them. It's true in the Middle East with the upheavals in the Middle East. We see how the Muslim Brotherhood exploits what may have been genuine concerns, economic, democratic, whatever, of the people. They then take advantage, and because they're organized and because they come into these situations with specific goals, discipline, they are able to exploit them and often dominate. And that's the danger with a movement like this, is that people who are extremists, who have specific goals, ideological, political, whatever, and they take advantage of well-meaning people or innocent people, because if you hear the interviews, most of the people can't articulate why they're there. Mm-hmm. They don't even, you know, they won't say, I have this specific goal, I have this specific goal. They're frustrated. I understand people are frustrated. Unemployment is high. The economic situation is bad. That's what drove many of the people into the streets in the Middle East, and it's what's driving people here, and they have to be very careful not to let it be exploited, to find legitimate vehicles for people to express their concerns. Obviously people don't disregard it, but the more they are associated with any kind of bigoted comments or exploitation by extremists, then the more it delegitimizes any legitimate claim or issues that they raise. And I think also they have to look at their behavior. When businesses are suffering, when they're putting people out of work and think that they are more important than everybody else, well, I think then they got to reconsider how sincere their motives are.
The next time we're together, I really do want you to talk at length about now the overarching problem facing the state of Israel, and that is Iran, and everybody's concerned with its nuclear program.
And Turkey.
And Turkey.
We'll talk Turkey about Iran.
Okay. At the moment, is the American administration consistently sensitive enough, in your view, to the threat of a nuclear Iran?
Number one, during the events of the past couple of months, Iran has been put on the back burner because people were focused on Libya, on Syria, on Iran. In the meantime, they're moving ahead, developing their nuclear capacity all the time. Now there's rumors of ties to, we know of North Korea, China, Pakistan on their nuclear program, missile development. We know they've expanded their military. We know that they have expanded their influence in Africa, in Latin America. This is a global issue. Iran is not a Middle East issue anymore. It is a global threat. Their goal is hegemony in the Middle East. And that is one of the reasons why the misunderstanding about this Arab spring, winter, fall is that if you don't understand in the context also of the Sunni Shiite battle, of Saudi Arabia versus Iran, of Turkey versus Iran too eventually, I believe, even though they make common cause when it's convenient, but bottom line, their aspirations are in conflict. One wants the Ottoman Empire, one wants to reassert the Persian Empire. They cover the same places. I mean, you can't have both of them. One is Sunni, one is Shiite. You see the fight already in regard to Syria between them and the tensions that arose. But in the meantime, Turkey helps Iran avoid the sanctions on banking and other things, so they serve each other's purposes on one level, and on the other level they're moving towards, I think, more and more conflict, and both are asserting themselves in Muslim countries in Central Asia, in the Caucasus, in the Middle East. And you see how their leadership ran, and both are trying to work with the Muslim Brotherhoods and other groups. This is something that is going to be of overriding significance. Then you add to that the nuclear program, weapons program of Iran. The IEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, will come out with a report shortly, if the Russians and Chinese don't block it, that will give damning evidence of all that you and I have talked about, which they denied under the previous corrupt leadership of the IEA, which covered for Iran and lied and distorted the reports. This report will lay out some of the facts. The deputy, Ali Heinonen, who was the deputy head of the IEA, made a speech in which he outlined much of the facts, and it's far more than what people believed. And I believe the IEA report will give even more evidence of it, and I believe that it's even more than what the IEA will report. They have it in various locations. We know they've expanded this capacity. We know that they have enough enriched uranium now to start building bombs. They don't have to build a bomb. They're just developing the capacity and the intimidation factor. And when you look at what they're doing everywhere now, just think of what they will do if they have a nuclear weapon.
There is never enough time to talk to you. I love talking to you.
Me too. Mutual.
And I really hope that this is a wonderful year for you personally, for you and your family, your grandchildren, for everyone. And that it's a year that you and I will speak often. You really enrich us enormously. Thank you, Malcolm, for all your help and all your work.
Shalom to you, and be a great year for everyone.
Thank you so much. And that was our meeting with Malcolm Hoenlein, Executive Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. I hope you enjoyed hearing him. Of course, as always, I'd love to know your reactions to some of the ideas expressed by Malcolm Hoenlein. Please write me, email me, post on our Facebook wall, tweet me. I look forward to hearing from many of you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who can send a tax-deductible contribution of $36 or more to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media to help support our programming. Tax-deductible checks may be made out to GEM and mailed to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. Please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD, and we thank you for your kind support.